Before we get to Charlie, we're going to play this clip that's from CNN, which talks about the unpopularity of the president's tariff increases.
Trump's tariffs on Canada, China, Mexico. Look at this. Just 38% support. You don't have to be a mathematical genius to figure out that 51% oppose is larger than the 38% support. Look, Trump has done some fairly popular things in his first few weeks in office. This is not one of them. No, no, no. Horrible, 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 to quote Charles Barkley. The American folks are opposed to these tariffs when you ask it specifically like this about the three countries, or if you ask it more vaguely about tariffs overall, they simply put, do not like it, Mr.
It's interesting. Even with China in the question,
Correct.
People say that they are opposed to tariffs. The majority here, and there's not a majority on a lot of things these days. How about how Americans say they want to see Donald Trump focused in this first 100 days and whether tariffs should be a focus?
You know, the two big focuses for Trump in the polling are immigration and the economy. Tariffs ain't it, my dear friend. Tariffs ain't it. Trump should focus on tariffs. In November of 2024, when Ipsos asked it, it was 1%. Look at what happened in December of 2024. It doubled. It doubled, but to only 2%. When you double to only 2%, you know that the American people don't want Trump's focus to be here. They don't like it. They don't want his focus to be there. They want it to be on other issues.
Are they paying attention? Do they notice that this is happening?
Yeah, so the big question is, you know, Trump has done a lot of things that are unpopular in the past, but the poll numbers haven't moved. That may be the case here, but I'm a little skeptical of that. Why? Take a look at weekly Google searches for tariffs. Look how much higher they are versus a year ago. They're up 2,400%. That reaches a 21-year high. You know folks are paying attention when there are more Google searches for that than for Taylor Swift, who almost always is in the top of Google searches.
There were more Google searches for tariffs than Taylor Swift?
Correct. In the past week, more Google searches for tariffs than for Taylor Swift. I never thought I'd see it happen, but American people are actually interested in tariffs in a negative fashion, it seems to be.
Interesting. We'll see what happens over the next few hours. It does raise questions about whether there will be the follow-through.
We'll see.
That was a clip from CNN where Harry Enton talks about the unpopularity of the Trump tariffs. And I wonder if you added Google searches for our guest Charlie Cook and Taylor Swift, whether that total would be higher than tariffs, we'll never know. Anyway, our guest today is Charlie Cook, who's the founder of the Cook Political Report. Charlie, when I saw that clip, I was reminded of something you wrote in one of your recent columns in the National Journal on the Cook Political Report, where you talked about Trump's famous biography, The Art of the Deal. Today, I guess the Mexican president promised to station 1,500 troops on the Mexican side of the border, and that led the president apparently to delay the tariffs on Mexico for a month. What does that say to you?
Well, my first reaction was that Harry needs to dial back on the caffeine. You know, we have to remind ourselves that Donald Trump has always had a very narrow trading range in terms of approval ratings. Basically, a third love him and a half hate him, and that doesn't leave a whole lot in between. But he you know, he started off like a little bit higher than he did actually last time. The Gallup has him at 47 approved, 48 disapproved. But only, I think his peak in his first term was 49%. But in the Mexico, yes, they put the troops, National Guardsmen, I think, on the border to assure Trump that they were doing their best to keep fentanyl from coming into the U.S. So it wasn't like a menacing action at the United States. But no, I think the reason I think that tariffs, I think most Americans don't even know what tariffs are. But to me, the danger is the inflation that would come from tariffs. Now, that's what I think would be extremely damaging to President Trump and to Republicans. And you know, people are a lot more familiar with what inflation is now than they were 4 years ago. And I think at the first sign that prices are really spiking, that would hurt him a great deal, and more than just whatever their understanding of what tariffs are.
Well, that's a good point, Charlie. Ever since Election Day, it seems to me Trump has been backtracking on his pledge to fight inflation. Soon after the election, he said something to the effect, well, it's going to be tough. There's really not a whole lot I can do about it. I think more recently he said it, wasn't a key issue for his administration. Is that going to come back and bite him?
Well, I keep waiting for him to say it's just going to be transitory if we have any. But those kinds of excuses don't carry a whole lot of weight. But we either have uh, a new round of inflation, or we don't. And if we do, it doesn't really matter what he says. So, but I'm, I think sort of the cumulative impact, and we have to remind ourselves that most Americans don't pay attention nearly as much as, say, the people listening to the show would. But
Or hosting it?
the cumulative impact of what he's doing is, I mean, I think he is marginalizing himself. And I think, the odds of, I mean, Republicans are going to have an incredibly hard time holding on to the House Representatives with only a 3-seat majority. Um, that's difficult enough. I mean, 90% of midterm elections, the party in the White House loses House seats. How does that not happen, particularly if he's doing things quite as provocatively as he is now? And any kind of inflation would kill him for sure. It might not affect the Senate races, but it sure as heck would the House.
Let me ask you something else I read in one of your columns of recent vintage. Uh, During the campaign, Donald Trump promised it'd be mass deportations of millions of immigrants. Is that a bluff, or do you think we're actually going to see that?
I don't think we'll see a million. I'd be surprised if we saw 500,000. But um, I think what what Trump does well and what he does badly. I think he has a general sense for what direction a lot of like average voters, a sentiment they may have. Where he has a problem is the degree, is he doesn't calibrate, he doesn't modulate. And they would, I think a lot of people think that, well, we ought to have a border and people ought to recognize the border. So they want to do something, but do they want to deport, 1 million people or more? No, they don't. But it's always, he licks his finger, sticks up in the air, sees which way it's going, but that doesn't tell you how strong it is. And a lot of these, he just pushes things just 10 times farther than he should.
Okay. Uh, One of the things, actually, we're coming up on a break, so I'm not going to ask you another question. Our guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, who is the founder of the Cook Political Report, one of our nation's foremost political observers, and a columnist for the Cook Political Report and the National Journal. We get back from this break, we're going to talk more, Charlie, about his assessment of the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration and also his assessment of the Democratic opposition to the first 2 weeks of Trump 2.0. But we'll be right back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon and our guest, Charlie Cook, right after these messages. So don't go anywhere. We still have a whole nother segment with Charlie, but we've got to take this break to accommodate our radio listeners. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. My guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, who is the founder of the Cook Political Report, one of our nation's foremost political observers. Some people might even consider him the foremost political observer, and a columnist for the Cook Political Report and the National Journal. Charlie, let me ask you this. In general, how would you assess the first 2 weeks of the second Trump administration?
Well, I think some of his, I'd say maybe 2/3 of his nominations for cabinet similar rank have been, you can agree with them or disagree with them, but that'd be what you might expect from almost any Republican president. But then you've got about a half dozen that are just truly bizarre, and you wonder whether you're reading this in the Onion or what, and whether it's Bobby Kennedy Jr. or Tulsi Gabbard or Pete Hegseth or whoever. But that I don't know that you'd be hard pressed to say these are the most talented people that our country has to offer. You'd be, basically pushing it just to say they're even marginally qualified. So I think that hasn't, that alone wouldn't affect the job approval rating, but I'd say he's getting off on the start of someone who knows that they'll never have to be on a ballot again. So in that case, is probably what you might expect.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. You noted the slim majority, Republican majority, especially in the House, where they're down to a couple, I guess, 3-seat majority now. Once with some of his appointments, but I guess there are still some few Republicans. Are they, do you think those few Republicans who are called, like, I guess, mainstream Republicans as opposed to Trump Republicans, do you think they're concerned about, especially the House members, about surviving the midterm elections, and will they do anything about it?
Well, I think that anybody that can read can know that what kind of exposure that they have. But it's also true, though, that our country is so like perfectly sorted with a T, that there are just simply very few. I think there are 3 Republicans that are sitting in districts that Kamala Harris won. I think there are 10 Democrats in states or districts that Trump won. When you talk about only 13 people in sort of enemy territory out of 435, wow, that's not much. But having said that, so it suggests to me that if Democrats were to get a majority, it wouldn't be a big one, but could you easily say 5, 6, 7? But yeah, no, these guys are they know that they're in danger, but I think it's easy to forget how much these Republican members of Congress are terrified of offending Trump's backers and having a MAGA primary challenger. And they,
Charlie, we're going to have to go to break again to bring back our radio listeners. Our guest in this half hour is Charlie Cook, founder of the Cook Political Report. We'll be right back. I mean, right back. Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is one of America's foremost political observers, Charlie Cook, the founder of the Cook Political Report. By the way, for our radio listeners, if you'd like to watch us as well as listen to us on Mondays, you can watch us at twitter.com/Brad Bannon, at facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos, and at youtube.com/at Deadline DC. Charlie, let me try you out in this. Well, first, let me ask you a specific question. Maybe I should ask a general question first, but I'm going to ask this. Do you think Democrats understand why Trump won in 2024 and why Republicans ended up with majority in both houses of Congress?
Well, I mean, I maintain that 2022 and 2024 are the most misinterpreted elections in modern history.
Okay.
But that's only sort of partial. I mean, I think when you gain 2 seats in the House of Representatives, that's not a massive repudiation. I think when you win 4 out of the 5 Senate races in competitive states, I don't think you've been, I don't think that's a massive repudiation. I think when you hold your own among governorships, when attorney general, secretaries of state, you have a net loss of 1. Um, I think this was a very targeted, focused repudiation of the Biden-Harris administration. But below that, it was kind of a nothing burger election. And I think just as I think Democrats or a lot of people misinterpreted 2022, thinking it was all about Dobbs, when it was all about Republicans nominating about 24 crazies in pivotal races. This time, this was about the administration. This wasn't, the thing is that Democrats shouldn't have had Senate seats in Ohio and Montana and West Virginia. I mean, those are not states that elect Democrats anymore. And Pennsylvania was the only swing state that had a Senate race that Democrats lost. I mean, it held on, Wisconsin and Arizona. I mean, so this was, I think in some ways, sometimes Democrats ignore their problems, and sometimes I think they overread too much. And I think in a lot of 2024, I think they have overread. This was about inflation, and it was about the most vulnerable people that are the most vulnerable economically reacting very badly to the first significant increase in inflation in 30 years. That's what it was about.
Well, I think you're right about that. I think it was pretty clear from looking at the polls and the exit polls that inflation was a big concern, and the voters in the exit polls who were concerned about inflation voted overwhelmingly from Donald Trump. One of my favorite stats from the exit polls is that if you looked at the voters who came from households where the household income was less than $50,000 a year, that was basically an even break between Trump and Harris, and that should be, or traditionally has been, a big Democratic advantage, but it wasn't this time, which again I think shows the power of the inflation issue.
And again,
Go
among
ahead.
whether it's African Americans, whether it's Latinos, I mean, it tended to be those without college degrees. I mean, it's just like all the signs were focused on a very, very narrow message they sent that's been painted with a very broad brush.
Okay, well, accepting that, do you think Trump is making a big mistake by dismissing the problems with inflation after talking so much and talking about during the campaign, making it such a priority?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think he's been sort of losing grasp for the last year, and that I think going into the election, if someone had told me that he was trying his best to lose, I could believe it. I'm not sure what he would have done differently. If anything, I mean, I think the reason he won was that Harris wouldn't offer up what she would do differently, and that despite him, his campaign actually was very, very effectively run. But I think he's just sort of careening from one thing to another. I don't think there's a whole lot of thought going into what they've decided to do. I don't think this is planned. I think this is just he's just going from working on shooting from the lip.
Okay. What advice would you give my fellow Democrats in terms of being the opposition to Republican and Trump policies?
Well, I don't think Democrats are going to be able to stop him on much, except for maybe a few nominations where Trump goes over the top. And I still think that Bobby Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, one or both of those could go down. But I think this is not. I think Democrats would be better off just let him have enough rope to hang himself. I mean, just he will do enough damage to himself that they just need to be ready to try to pick things up when things do in fact turn around. But I think it's probably get a focus on Democrats that are not in Washington, that are out in state capitals, that are out in the country and not sort of tainted by a connection to the Biden administration.
Okay. Well, let's explore that idea a little bit. You mentioned the nominate trouble, I should say the troubled, well, I don't know, troubled nominations of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard. And I think you said they're just marginally qualified at best to do their jobs. When I heard about, well, Kennedy and Gabbard, is this just the president giving the middle finger to Democrats because I'm president now and I can do anything I damn well please?
I think it's giving the finger to all of his critics, regardless of who they are. And basically, I'm going to do this because I can. And I don't need any other reasons to do something. And when I said marginally qualified, I was not really talking about Gabbard or Kennedy because I don't think they're even marginally qualified.
Okay.
But I think the reason that those two particularly are uniquely vulnerable is neither one of them have any constituency within the Republican Party and no natural defenders. And I think the only way either one of them get through, or if some of Trump's supporters basically practically blackmail Republicans into not opposing her. I mean, you saw what they did to Joni Ernst, who clearly did not want to vote for Pete Hegseth, but they basically browbeat her into going along with it.
Yeah. What do you think the next couple of weeks of Trump 2.0 are going to look about? It's been very upsetting. What do you see happening in the next couple of weeks? Is he just going to continue on his merry way, or is he just going to try to adjust and maybe calm down a little bit?
I don't have any reason to believe that the next couple of weeks or the next 3 3/4 years are going to be any different, because I don't think he's listening to anybody, to be perfectly honest, and I don't think that's going to change. I think he, I think Susie Wiles is very sharp, but I think most of the people around him are considerably less likely to rein him in than the people that were around him in the first term, and that didn't work out so well. But Trump does best when he has a devil to beat on, when he has a foil. But when he doesn't, he kind of flails around, and witness what happened in the 2018 and 2020 elections. When the elections were more about him and his policies, he lost. When the election was about Hillary Clinton, as 2016 was, or if it's about Joe Biden, as it was in 2024, he didn't do well. And I think that's sort of, I have no reason to think that that's going to change.
Okay, I want to thank Charlie for joining us today because we're running out of time. I want to thank Charlie, who is one of the nation's foremost political observers and the founder of the Cook Political Report. I also want to thank our guests from the first half hour, Bob Deans, who is Director of Strategic Engagement from the Natural Resources Defense Council. And I want to thank my intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi, who makes sure the trains run on time and the show stays online. We'll be back next week with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon to continue our ongoing discussion about the Trump administration and the Democratic response. So don't go anywhere. Stand tall and stay strong in these troubled and turbulent times, and make sure you watch us next week.